Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on BIM 360 and how it's being applied to projects being delivered through the cloud. Before we get into it, just a little bit about A2K Technologies. We are an industry provider of design-related technologies and services. So obviously focusing on things like Revit as a design tool in our AEC space, things like BIM 360 as a means to deliver it, among many others. We are now officially a global organization with investment from a company called RIB, and we also have investment in other partners, technology partners throughout the world now. So A2K is certainly going strong, and we are now growing more so globally. My name is Chad Smith. I'm a consulting technical lead at A2K Technologies. I focus predominantly in the architecture, engineering, and construction space. My background is approximately 20 years in the architectural and construction industry, working on a variety of project types and sizes and so forth, prior to making the move over to where I am at the moment. I assist customers like yourself with the implementation of certain design technologies and also the training that goes along with it. So I think it's fairly safe to say that within our industry, times are certainly changing, and probably more so, none more so than in the cloud space, getting projects into an online situation where we can access that information, and not just access it, but in order to be able to work with it in new and interesting ways than what we've been able to do with non-cloud related data. And this is true for both the design and the construction industry. Now, when we talk about the design industry, this has been going through that evolution for some time now. It has already evolved from the 2D space into the 3D space, taking it from the likes of AutoCAD or other 2D related design tools and bringing it into the 3D world by way of tools such as Revit. And for many companies, this has actually occurred for quite some time, over, say, the past decade, and for some even longer than that. And even though we've been through this evolution of going from drawing board to 2D and then ultimately into the BIM and 3D space, it's probably going to be quite some time before we make that next gigantic evolution in the way that we do the design work. But in the meantime, we're going to see some minor incremental changes that are going to also tie in with construction, as we'll see throughout the course of today's session. Now, what you can see on the screen at the moment, this is an all too familiar sight. We find that, yes, paper is a robust and it's a comfortable medium for taking design work out on the site, but it's also a fragile form of communication. It's easily damaged, it's heavy and bulky. Those set of drawings on the left-hand side image are only a small set, but there can be a considerable amount of information that needs to move from design offices out into construction. And not to mention the information contained on those drawings is timely and can actually become out of date quite quickly. Even anywhere up to a week's time could pass before design information or the design has iterated before it actually seeing it out on site for the construction stage. But construction is currently going through their next evolution, just like what design has done. But as we go through this next evolution in the construction space, the design space is still going to come along for the ride. And that's what we're going to focus on today is how both design and construction are going to be working together for the betterment of the project. Now, this evolution in the construction space is just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Things are just starting to ramp up for construction. And looking at this particular image here, we can see that there are many new technologies that we are yet to even see out in the construction space. And we'll find that advances in construction will also now influence and dictate how design work is done. Historically, it's been that the design space, through architects and engineers in particular, have been setting the standard for that design and construct process. But as we see construction now starting to take advantages of some of these newer technologies coming around, it means that construction, to an extent, are now almost driving the process. Now, before we get to this level of integration out on site, let's have a look at where we are right now. And this is specifically in regards to BIM 360 as both a design and delivery tool. So BIM 360 is a common cloud-based platform whereby the data is stored all online so that it can be it could be an iPad or some other kind of mobile device. And it can be across multiple different software as well across those devices. So if we're talking about design, we're talking about Revit in the Autodesk world, because that ties in with BIM 360 quite nicely. Or it might be by way of a web browser through maybe Chrome, it might be on a Linux or on an Apple device, and by way of the mobile application on both iOS and Android as well. I'm just going to take a moment. I see that there's a few questions. Okay, cool. I was just quickly checking the questions just to make sure that there weren't any questions about sound. Okay. Now, as this information is coming through and being generated and stored within this platform, we also need to be able to analyze it. You know, data and information is one thing, and to capture it and use it. But in order to get the most benefit out of it, particularly moving forward and onto newer projects into the future, it needs to be analyzed. And platforms like BIM 360 are now making development advances into finding insights into issues that may be occurring or even reoccurring on your project, so that you can hopefully not repeat those same mistakes or generate those same issues time and time again. And it's the issues, the mistakes, which are the costly things on a project. I do not need to tell you about the risk that goes into both designing and delivering on a project. BIM 360, one of its core competencies is to mitigate risk. That's because 90% of a project's risk is actually during the construction process, at that stage whereby the build process can occur and issues arise, and by then it's typically too late. It's either been built or it's very costly to rectify after the fact. So it's actually both the design and construction's roles, okay, the users, the companies within those roles, to address these key competencies of risk using something like BIM 360. Now, here's a high-level overview of what the different licensing and modules look like under BIM 360, obviously excluding the Revit component, because that's a design tool specifically. Noting here that the process is only covering the pre-construction through to the operations and maintenance, but this could extend as early sketch design in the architects and engineering offices before we even get to the pre-construction stage. Now, we will be focusing quite heavily on using Revit as a design tool. And that is because BIM 360 has a very close connection to design data which Revit is generating. And this is simply a fact because both Revit and BIM 360 are Autodesk products, and therefore Autodesk can make them work together as best as they can. It's not to say that it's only for people that are using Revit, because you can capture and upload and use non-Revit related design data, but it does work a little bit better if you are working in that space. Now, focusing on Revit as the design tool, we would use something like BIM 360 Design to facilitate the multi-user, or what we technically call the work sharing process, to get many different users from potentially many different locations onto the same working files at the same time. Now, some of you may be familiar with the likes of Collaboration for Revit, the older version of BIM 360 Design. And if you've used some of those older tools like C4R, Collaboration for Revit, then you will be somewhat familiar with it. But the design, the next version of this process, has some other workflows built into it that you may not have yet seen. Now, design is just facilitating the work sharing across multiple users and potentially across multiple companies. Docs, on the other hand, is our document management system. And that is where we store the data, regardless of whether it's design and Revit files, or maybe they're design files from other products. Maybe they're drawings, maybe they're specification guides, maybe they're photos, and so on. It is the document management system where files are uploaded and stored, viewed, and then used with other modules, such as the coordinate and build modules that you can see on the screen. Now, as the design is being generated and the files are being stored, we can use BIM 360 Design Coordinate to do our coordination process, thereby bringing multiple design files together purely for the purpose of doing a clash management task. And finally, when we hit the construction site, we can take all of that information out with us, either on a laptop or a smaller mobile device, so that we can facilitate the build process. It puts certain tools into the hands of the likes of project managers, subcontractors, architects, and engineers, so that they can correctly and proficiently monitor the performance or the progress of the build. Now, around those four main modules that you can see in blue, we've got some secondary tools such as layout for getting a model, a BIM, out onto site for a digital set-out workflow. There's plan for doing task management, ensuring that trades are delivering on time, and if not, then to find out the reasons why. So basically a lean construction task and project planning tool. And BIM 360 Ops in the bottom right-hand corner for the operations and maintenance of the entire building, or maybe the assets within that building. Now, BIM 360 has been around for quite a number of years now. It was released in the US a year earlier than the rest of the world. So at least 2 or 3 years now, depending on the region that you've been operating in. And over those years, many users have adopted and come on board with using it as a tool for both design and the delivery out to field. Now, 2 such examples of these at a fairly large level are in Melbourne, giving some assistance to the design teams there for implementing BIM 360, in this case for the coordination and the review of models for their level crossing removal project, which has, as you can see on the map there, numerous locations and buildings that needed to be managed both during the design and construct process. It's a large undertaking. I believe it's still going forward with this. But it was a tool that brought those many different users together for the purpose of reviewing design data. And if we look up towards Brisbane, one of the largest redevelopment projects being undertaken in Australia at the moment, the Queen's Wharf Precinct redevelopment. This is also going to be adopting BIM 360 during the build phase. It's been lightly used during the design stage, but there are soon to be a couple of hundred people being brought on board across a number of those BIM 360 modules. So this is actually a great example of a large project making use of, or will be making use of, some of these features. But we're not here to talk about the large projects. We want to talk in this session about how some of these features can be used by the smaller teams and maybe on the smaller projects. We want to focus on the likes of maybe a sole trader, someone who's an architect or an engineer who needs to work on potentially a residential design. Or maybe they're taking the role of project manager to get that residential project built. We want to focus on the small to mid architects and engineers, and maybe smaller builders who are delivering those projects on site, potentially like offices and other commercial related projects. And we also want to focus on the likes of retailers who who need to operate their facilities within some of these other project types that some of you may be developing for them. Retailers still have a design, installation, and an ongoing maintenance and operations stage for their projects that they need to process. So there's actually some advantages, depending on who you are and the types of the projects that you're working on, that you could gain from some of these BIM 360 tools and workflows. So let's start in the design collaboration space. So putting aside the knowledge that we know that many different companies can work together across a cloud product, okay, that's fine, we know that. But there are other companies like maybe national companies, those that might have an office in many different states, and those different offices need to work together for the good of your company. We're finding that in the past, there have been difficulties in getting those users on board to participate on those projects, mainly due to separation by distance and not having the tools available to get those users up and running with other teams. So in this example here, we might have a national company that has 4 offices around the country, and we might want to bring them together to work on a single project. Now, back when I was working in the design area, for a fairly large, well-known property developer, we would have people come from interstate on secondment to work in our office for a couple of months. And going back a number of years, that was a fairly costly process. It meant those people had to spend time away from their family and so forth. But using something like BIM 360 design collaboration, it means all we have to do is assign them a license, and within literally 5 minutes, they can be up and running on somebody else's project. So if the work's being done in Office C in this map here, it means we can bring somebody in Office B online to fill in and to help lift the heavy load that's being required in Office C and get them up and running literally in a matter of minutes. Now, the general workflow for a larger project where we do have multiple companies in place is that files and design-related information is sent across those numerous companies and done so on a fairly routine basis. But if we were to focus on something like a company like a multidiscipline, maybe it's an engineering company that might have many different sub-disciplines, so mechanical, plumbing, hydraulics, and so forth. Or it could be an architect that might have a building architecture team, an interiors team, might have a landscaping team, and so forth. And within each of those respective companies, they just simply want to work between themselves, but across their little internal teams. Using design collaboration, we can do that, and we can still maintain a design workflow that you may be using and have been doing so for the last decade or so. So if we use this example here, where we might have, for example, we'll just call them Team 1, they can be working on what we call packages. And a package is, in respect to BIM 360, is a collection of documents. It could be drawings, it might be models. It doesn't matter what it is, it's a package of information that they create, and then they offer up as shared information to other teams. So just to use the architecture example again, the building architects might be offering up a package of file for maybe the interior designers to use. Now, within this workflow, the second team is able to see that team one has shared some design information with them, and they can inspect it and decide whether that is information that is relevant to their point in time and the work that they need to get done at the moment. Now, this is analogous to traditional methods whereby an architect or an engineer, they might zip up some information as a package, stick it onto a file sharing site. They might alternatively put it through an email if it's small enough to be an attachment. And then the recipient is able to then receive the packaged information, download it out of their email or from that online shared space, unzip it, maybe open up the files so that they can inspect the contents. And should the contents be sufficient for then using as part of their own workflow, they can then use those files potentially as file links in their own projects. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. We've got team one that is sharing information for team two. Now, in this case here, let's make the assumption that team two isn't yet ready for the information that team one is sharing. So team one continues working, they keep doing iterations and revisions, and thereby they get to the point where they create a second package. Let's call it package B. This package could be a revised amount of data. It could be a completely a different set of data that they want to offer up. Regardless, they share it, and team two, once again, reviews this information. And this time, team two has decided that this information from team one is relevant and they want to consume it into their own design workflow, most likely as a file link. And this process continues. The concept of creating packages, sharing it, reviewing it, choosing to consume it, and then repeat. Now, this process here, we're familiar with doing this through older methods and looking in context with this diagram here, but there is an actual proper interface inside of BIM 360 that takes care of this workflow in a much more elegant way. Here is the design collaboration interface with the design teams down the left-hand side. So once again, it could be across different companies, but since we're talking about internal workflows for this session, it could be across the internal teams of maybe a multidiscipline company. Now, those teams create and share packages on a timeline. And that's those lines that you can see there that contain individual packages that have been shared at routine times. By looking at it in this way, we can see when information is being shared. So we get the transparency around the iterative process across those teams. Within those packages, we also have the ability to view the contents, and you can start seeing that by way of the 3D model that's sitting underneath that timeline. Now, I've talked about the review process as part of sharing packages and consuming them. And built into BIM 360 in general, but it makes a lot more sense when we view it in context of design collaboration, is the ability to compare versioned information between packages. So when a package is shared with you, you would like to know what has changed since the last time that same information may have been shared with you. So using the change comparison tools, we can more clearly see what's been added, removed, and potentially modified since that last package. This gives all teams the information and the transparency that they require without having to overly converse by way of, say, email. Now, the design team, those that are working in and designing in Revit, actually have a fairly close relationship with those in the doc space. And we'll get to docs in a moment, and that's the document management, as I said, in that overall workflow. So as the design teams are working, they can release through what we call a publishing process, iterative updates of their design information to non-design users. They can be estimators, project managers, they might be executives within the building, other consultants, and so forth. And the reason they can do this and why there is a nice relationship between these two particular teams has more to do with the fact that built into BIM 360 are many different file formats that can be viewed natively within the web browser. And we'll see that in a moment. So across this design collaboration space, we find that BIM 360 is providing an enhanced access to the design data. And it also connects disparate resources, such as across different offices, without necessarily the heavy admin overhead of transporting people around, all without the onerous process of having to upload and download and upload and download constantly as the design changes. And we're finding that others are actually taking advantage of this as well. And by others, I mean consultants specifically that need to work or potentially work with your design teams. Over the last few years in particular, we've seen a slightly higher uptake of outsourcing certain work. This isn't necessarily with the intention of completely replacing design teams within your organization, but obviously when you hit busy periods, you need to bring an extra person or two on just to fill maybe a couple of months worth of work so that you can get it out the door, and then you can minimize the size of your team by taking those same people back off in the low periods. And contractors are being used to do this, and they're doing so using the likes of BIM 360 design collaboration. So if you're using design collaboration, you can assign a license to another contractor for a couple of months, get them to work for you for a few months, and then close out their license once their work is done. And those contractors, such as Atlas Industries out of Vietnam, who are fairly well known for this type of work, are also exploiting that fact, that ability to come online with another company like yourselves so that they can assist for that period of time. It actually helps them to connect to your design data, once again, without that heavy admin overhead of sending files via other means. Now, let's have a look at how this information is stored. And this is done through the document management space. We have a fairly standard looking folder and file interface whereby the folders and the folder structure that you generate has permissions so that you can control who can access which information and make sure that people aren't viewing information that is contrary to their role on the project. And files that we upload can be of any type. So we can upload what we want, but as I mentioned before, that there are a number of file formats, around 100 or so, can be viewed natively within BIM 360 and within the browser. So this obviously is file formats like Revit, AutoCAD, it can be PDFs, we can view Office documents and others. This means that those that are reviewing the information and needing access to it can do so without having to have native design tools installed on their machine. And because Autodesk is very much a heavy Windows environment, it means that those that are on maybe Apple devices, Linux devices, and so forth can still access this information in a fairly seamless kind of way. Now, the files that are uploaded are also versioned. So we don't go through the process of overriding and destroying or losing past information. Versions are maintained so that we can always recall information that has previously been uploaded. And should something or somebody have actually deleted something out of the folder, then it means we can always go to the recycle bin and restore it within a set period of time. And over the top of these, in particular, drawings that we may be able to view, is the ability to add markups and issues and even push these documents through workflows so that we can maintain a hierarchy on who is accessing what information and when by way of approvals and rejections of certain information. This is what a document can look like when we're viewing it. Now, this isn't a screenshot that's made up of multiple other screenshots pasted over the top. This is actually all the information that we could access as part of a review process. We've got the drawing, which is clearly showing some markups as listed on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we can even open other contextual references, such as other drawings, or maybe even the 3D model. And we can review all of this in one space without having to jump between 2D and 3D and other sources of information like markups and issues. It puts all of this information into one spot so that you don't have to jump around. And when we look at things like issues that we're capturing, we can also view and search that data from such as an issues list. Here we can see not only design issues, but coordination issues and construction related issues. We can see where they are by location in the building. We can see who they're assigned to by name or company. And we can also see due by dates to ensure that issues are dealt with in a timely manner. And this is a project level list. And when we drill down into each of those issues, we start drilling down to the documents that they're actually attached to. Coming back to the fact that we have both versions and a comparison tool built into BIM 360, we can see here the two 2D and the 3D comparison tools of the same part of the project. When looking at it from a 2D perspective, we simply just have the two drawings overlaid and by way of color, identifying what those changes are. But when we look at it in the 3D view, we get more contextual information. We can see it in 3D. We can see information about how, in this case, it relates back to the Revit model and other things, which I'll show you a little bit later on. And since we're talking about the document management system, it means that we must be able to access this by many different types of devices. So just looking at this example here, we can quite clearly see both on a laptop, so we'll call it a desktop, maybe on an iPad or even on a phone, whether it's Android or iOS. It means that we can access not only 2D but 3D information. We can access markups and issues. We can access other dashboards and analytics, once again, depending on what our role is and the information which is relevant to our tasks for the day. Now, more recently, BIM 360 has received Office 365 integration. Now, all users who have access into BIM 360 have the ability to view natively Office files such as PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. But where it gets a little bit more useful is for users or companies that subscribe to Office 365, it means that you're able to also edit these files directly from within BIM 360. So thereby alleviating a little bit the process of having to source this information from a different location, such as on Microsoft OneDrive, maybe Dropbox, maybe back on your own Office server. If we put some of this Office information in line or alongside our design information, we can keep more of it in one location. And in this case, something like an Excel file that's looking at maybe some services information that may have been exported out of Revit, we can go through the process of editing, making some minor changes or more larger changes if we need to, and then returning straight back to the BIM 360 interface. We're finding that with this current integration, it means that Office 365, which is great for use for operating your general day-to-day business tasks and tying it in with BIM 360 for design-related tasks makes quite a nice combination of cloud products. Now, once we've got our design work done or is ongoing, and we've got that place to store it inside the document management, we still need to go through a coordination process. This is a process that's historically done by a BIM manager on a desktop. It's usually done in isolation. It's usually a collection of information that they sit down and they process, and then they divvy up that information and assign back out to the design teams for addressing any issues that may have been found. Now, BIM 360 still helps us to take care of much of that coordination process, but it does so with a slight twist to it. And I'll get to what that twist is in just a moment. Now, just to digress ever so slightly, there are companies that are also instigating the use of digital field offices, such as the one that you can see from Skanska in this image. It's putting this design information, it could be coordination information, it could be access to issues and markups and so forth, in the likes of a large toolbox that's robust and put out on site so people can still access coordinated information. Now, coming back to the coordination process, what we can see here are a number of Revit files and also an IFC model. And we can use a DWG file as part of this coordination process as well. By putting all of this modeled information into a certain location inside of document management, it means that BIM 360 is able to go to work for you to find coordination issues. And this is the twist. Rather than having somebody sit down and manually process or create coordination tests to test for clashes and so forth, BIM 360 is always doing this in the background, and it's always doing it in an automated fashion. Here we can see both listings of files down the left hand and across the top. Where they intersect, it tells us how many clashes there are for both of those files. And not only how many clashes, but conveniently highlighting for us the number of clashes found between those models. So it gives us a nice little heat map, which we should be seeing get lighter and sort of fade away as the project evolves and more coordination issues are ultimately resolved. When we start drilling down into the results, such as what we can see here, we can get an overview of where all of those clashes are occurring. In this case, it happens to be a structural model and a services model. And when we start drilling down into the individual the clash results, we get even more detailed information. Here we can see a services model that's grouping all the result data by system name. And this is showing us that the mechanical return air 2 system is clashing with 22 other, in this case, structural items. When we get to the point of actually addressing these issues that are found, these coordination issues, we can start assigning them to somebody, or we can start marking them off as being not an issue in the first place. Not everything inside a design model is modeled. It could be the lack of penetrations through walls for services. Modeling every single penetration is an onerous task. Or it might be the fact that two objects are only overlapping by just a couple of mil, and therefore out on site they can just be jiggled a little bit so that they can fit in. So for those kinds of non-issues, they're marked as such, not an issue. For those that are issues and therefore need to be resolved, it means that we raise an issue, a formal issue that is assigned to a user and is tracked by way of its status. It provides a more identifiable responsibility for the team of users that need to correct coordination-related tasks. And what you'll see throughout BIM 360 is that this process of generating issues is fairly consistent. Regardless of whether it's a design issue, a coordination issue like what we see here, or maybe a construction issue like we'll see a little bit later on. They're all generated and managed in much the same kind of way. And those clashes are also then reported as an overall list over on the clashes list. So this way, once again, we get that visibility into what is currently open. We can see who they're assigned to and even when, or the due by date by which they needed to be resolved, with links that'll take them back into that clash result for viewing. So now hopefully we're at a point where the design models are currently being coordinated. And I should have probably also pointed out that the coordination process, while typically is done across different design teams, there are companies that take pride in generating a clash-free model as a handover or within a package to other companies. So in this case, it could be that you've received all the models in and nobody else is using BIM 360, but you can still use it internally to do that coordination process. So now that the clashes and the coordination process is done, we start getting this information out into the field for construction. This is perfect for architects and engineers, for subject matter inspectors and so forth that need to capture the information. And some of these examples that you can see on the screen are fairly typical of this process. Now, we need to capture and manage and close out form-based information that refer to maybe safety, ensuring that people are correctly harnessed and have their high-vis vests on and hard hats and so forth. We want to make sure that things are installed correctly. So maybe the reinforcement prior to the concrete being poured. We want to make sure that the assets are installed and commissioned and working correctly. Or maybe just a small set of defects need to be checked off and resolved. Maybe carpet tiles are lifting or there's marks on painted walls and so forth. This is all information that needs to be captured and is typically done by way of forms, either as written paper or maybe on a mobile device, but in a less, I'll say less intelligent method, such as maybe using an Excel spreadsheet. We typically start off by firstly defining what our checklist is. This is a customized checklist that you can create for what it is that you need to capture. Or maybe it's stuff that you need captured, so you create the checklist and you issue it to somebody else for completion. Those checklists, as they're starting to be filled out and completed, we can see their progress over on the checklist list. So here we can see we've got a number of in-progress checklists. We've got one there that's actually being completed, and we can clearly see when they were scheduled to be checked and whether that scheduled date is currently overdue. Once again, providing a little bit more transparency to those that need to manage this process and the teams that are capturing the information. A checklist is a fairly straightforward thing to fill out for those users. They're either passing or failing, or maybe setting the question within the checklist as being not applicable. The way that these questions are defined is up to you. You could say pass, fail. It might be yes, no, a true or a true, false response that you're looking for. But regardless of the way that you propose the question, how they answer it is the important part. And in this case, we can see question 1.4 has actually failed. And in doing so, an issue is raised for that failed item. So now we've got two things running in parallel. We've got a checklist that still needs to be completed, and we've got an issue for something very specific within that checklist. And we can see the two connected, and we can jump between the two depending on the information that we're wanting to view. Now, also around the outside is just some other general information about the checklist, such as maybe who this checklist was issued to, the due by date or the scheduled date, and even getting the user to sign off with a signature. And you can see that over towards the left-hand side by way of the required signatures. So this way we get a formal closeout and response to when the checklist has been completed. But I did say that this was a mobile first approach rather than on a desktop. So these kinds of approaches that you can see inside, these approaches that you can see on these images are now considered to be out of date. Like I said, whether it's by way of paper or even a mobile device that has a less intelligent method by way of maybe an Excel form or a PDF file that has fields within it. Because by capturing using those traditional methods, it's slow and untimely. And most importantly, the information that's being captured cannot be analyzed. But when we do it by way of, say, a BIM 360 form, it means that the data that's being captured within that form is then utilized through other predictions and analytics, as we'll see towards the end of this presentation. And this is the point that construction is at the moment. It's at the point whereby it's starting to digitize much of its delivery information, and more so that the big data that it's capturing can be analyzed. So this is what it looks like from a mobile perspective. We have a list of checklists on the left. We can open up a checklist to see some of the metadata about it. We fill out the questionnaire, including any issues raised for non-conformances, and then ultimately closing it out. And you can see in that last image, the ability to add an actual signature at the bottom. And it's much the same for issues as well. The ability to browse the issues, raise them and view them, and also pushing them through a workflow so that the information can be tracked and there's transparency and probity into the workflow for those issues. And because we're working from a document management system as well, it means that these issues can be attached to supporting information such as a floor plan or a 3D view. And much of what we capture by way of checklists and issues goes through this kind of managed workflow, whereby somebody like a contractor, it could be an architect or maybe an engineer that's also filling out a checklist, starts up a checklist until they get to the point that they may find some non-conformances, at which point an issue is initiated and that is running in parallel, where it may be assigned back to the subcontractor for rectification. Or if it was in the design space, back to maybe the architect, engineer, or drafty that needs to correct it back on the drawings. And once that issue has been rectified, regardless of what the issue kind is, it can then jump back down into the checklist status to complete the checklist and then close it out. And once it's closed out, it means that we can run some reports to analyze the data that was contained within this entire workflow. The field module is being used actively by other well-known companies. Abeka, who is a consulting services company, has to both design and deliver on their services, information, and product. So they're able to use field to capture it and ultimately commission their assets as part of that build process. And when we start talking about the data that it's capturing, we also need to be aware that some of this information may only be relevant to certain people. You know, what I'm working on could be different to what you're working on, which may be different to somebody else. And so therefore, every user has their own and unique project home. Here we can see that I might be someone who is dealing with field-related issues and maybe checklists, but I'm also somebody who might be interfacing a little bit with the design space and the packages which the design teams are generating. It also tells me at a very high level what today's risk is on the project, ensuring that we want to keep it obviously at a low or a very minimal level. Some other companies, such as Hanson Youngkin, have been using the likes of BIM 360 for quite some time as part of their construction process. And they can use the likes of Field for the delivery of projects and capturing checklist and issue-related data. They also have an internal system that they call Highway that they can integrate field data into other business systems. But let's also not forget about other kinds of businesses, particularly the likes of retailers, because retail is where some of the most advantages can be gained from working in a cloud-based system like BIM 360. Retailers not only do the design work, they need to install all of their assets, things like shelves and fridges and tables and chairs and so forth. And they need to also operate their store in an ongoing fashion. I think you're probably aware that a brand such as Coles or Woolworths or Cotton On and so forth, they go through a rebranding process every couple of years. And that's why your local stores will get a renovation every few years to sort of freshen it up. So putting that into a cloud workflow means that they've always got the data stored in a central location for all team members to access. Now, most people know that A2K have been working with the likes of Coles for quite a number of years. And only recently we've helped them to migrate over into BIM 360 off of their older document management system. This means that they do have the ability for their store planners to now actively design online. It means that estimators and other people such as store managers can access documents. And it also means that they can commission their information out on site during the installation and build process. And this is what that overall process could look like for basically any retailer. So we can see on the left docs where a large selection of users can access that centralized data storage. It means that the store planners, maybe a marketing team, can access the design files and work on them. It means that the store planners and maybe subcontractors can go through the coordination process during the build process. We've also got the field component whereby some of those same people can access that information for the delivery out on site. And then ultimately, and I only touched on this briefly towards the beginning, the operations stage whereby maybe a store manager might want to raise a reactive maintenance issue for the store that they manage, and therefore get a project manager or maybe a subcontractor out to assess and then hopefully rectify. And then that process restarts again once they go through another rebranding process for any given store. But winding back a little bit and having a look at the sole trader as well, somebody like an architect or an engineer that's acting in their own right, or maybe as a consultant on another team. They have benefits to gain because they traditionally use other systems like maybe a Dropbox and so forth to do essentially the same thing as what BIM 360 does, but doing so in those older systems that are not a design-focused environment. And that's the key here, is that despite being a sole trader, they can put their information in a centralized location that is design-focused. It gives them the ability to view design information that they may have published there. So when they go out and they do a design meeting with their customer, maybe out in their customer's home or another customer's office and so forth, it means that they can take that information with them by way of a mobile device and go through an actual design review process, but doing so in BIM 360 rather than a more complicated tool like Revit that customers can't understand. So now that we can see that we've got a number of different ways that the information can be generated and stored and then interacted with, we've got this information that we can then go through a prediction and analytics process to get even more value out of that data. A research paper by a company called FMI in 2018 found that 96% of all data captured goes unused in the AEC industry, in our industry. And that is a phenomenal amount of information that goes unused. And that's historically, okay? So whether it's by way of a paper method or by way of, like I said, an iPad with maybe Excel or a form-based PDF on there, that information is hard to analyze, and hence why it tends to go to waste. Now, obviously the information captured by those forms is used immediately, but it doesn't give us any predictive insights into how to minimize maybe those same issues on future projects. Now, for the most part, it's going to be the jobs of software vendors like Autodesk and so forth to do this work for you and to help you understand what data you're capturing and how to interpret it. That's because you're not data scientists. That's their job. So BIM 360 is receiving additional tools gradually to help you understand the data that you're capturing. Now, here's a pretty good summary of where things are at the moment. For the most part, across both the design and construction space, all right, most companies are still tend to work down here in this paper-based space by filling out paper checklists and working off paper drawings and so forth. Now, some have actually moved up into this digital space, so getting their drawings digitized, getting them onto mobile devices in certain ways and so forth. Few, again, are actually taking that information and moving into more data-rich digital methods where they can start reporting and gaining insights into their information. And fewer, again, are actually leveraging that data through predictive analytics or maybe machine learning or low-level AI systems. And some of the quotes that I've mentioned up to this point throughout the session help us to back this up as well, because we have seen many, in particular larger companies at this stage, starting to move up into this top space because they understand that when they capture data, they can use it to analyze it and then gain insights for their future projects. Now, looking at what some of this data looks like, it can be by way of graphed information that we can see here. So this gives us a nice visual method to interpret quickly and easily things like maybe active and closed issues and so forth. But if we were someone like a business executive, somebody who needs to understand it at a business level, not necessarily a project delivery level, they might have access to interfaces such as this, where they can see quickly how many projects they have that are being delivered for their company. We can see what the risk level is for each of those projects. And when we start drilling down into some of these projects, like some of these higher level ones, we start seeing additional metrics again. So here we can start quantifying the risk data that's being captured by the information from the likes of issues and checklists and so forth. Here we can see that this project is running at a high level of risk due to a number of water risk issues, maybe a handful of subcontractors, and a lot of those are actually considered high risk. And then drilling down further into that data. And this can be captured by way of viewed by way of a desktop or a mobile device. It puts those analytics, those predictive analytics in the hands of those that have the ability to do something about them. Now, while we're also looking at the screenshot here, we can also see this job site camera in the top right-hand corner of this dashboard. What's interesting here is that data is not just about what's being generated inside of BIM 360. It's also about the data that's captured by other third-party tools. This job site camera is actually being captured by a company called TrueLook. But regardless of whether it's a third party, it's still able to be integrated as a data source into the dashboard of BIM 360. In fact, much of the information can be dashboarded in various different ways. We can completely customize what our project home looks like to make it more relevant to the data that's interesting to you, something that you need to action. We do this by way of a card library where we can pull out a variety of different other graphing sources for any of those data points, such as RFIs, issues, safety, and so forth. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, third-party integration also extends into this same card library. Here we can see drone deploy on the left-hand lower side for viewing drone aerial imagery, or maybe Holo Builder in the bottom right-hand corner, who is recognized as being a leader in the 360 photograph space during construction. Or maybe SmartVid, who is an AI tool and company that is able to analyze photos and videos stored within your document management system so that it can quickly and automatically identify safety-related issues and raise them as an issue inside of BIM 360. And all of this information can come together by way of a report as well. So the ability to report in both a visual and written fashion to get this information into the hands of any users that may not be licensed to enter the BIM 360 space. They could be people who need to just every now and then review some information, but they don't necessarily need to be an active participant. We do this through the reporting tools. So I said at the beginning of the session that times, they're changing. We don't draft on drawing boards anymore, or at least I doubt very few people actually are. And even to that extent, we very rarely, if we can help it, draft digitally in 2D. All right, we want to be generating models and BIMs that we can then put through other workflows. We don't necessarily estimate from paper anymore. While we still may estimate from a digital source, we certainly don't do it from paper. And even doing it from a digital source isn't necessarily the most efficient in lieu of using a model instead. We don't dig trenches by hand. We try to use excavators and graders to do this for us. And we try to minimize the amount of manual measuring and cutting of materials out on site, and hopefully in favor of doing things like prefabrication in the future. Instead though, we use BIMs to do our quantification and estimation process. That BIM that we can view either in 3D or maybe a 2D view, but still pulling out intelligent information like areas and quantities and so forth. We try to put our BIM information into surveying equipment so that we can do a digital set out while out on site rather than using a tape measure or a ruler. And we try to use more intelligent fabrication tools for the likes of maybe prefabrication. This is a piece of hardware by a company called Howick that generates stud work. It takes a BIM or its information and is able to measure, cut, punch, fold, and even stamp with serialized numbers for assembly. It means that they can put this information into a more intelligent workflow, such as maybe putting it through BIM 360 so that we can use that as a source for the assembly process and using the BIM for the fabrication process. So it hopefully comes as no surprise now that throughout the course of this presentation that I haven't really used the word PDF too much. I'm not suggesting that PDFs are going to go away anytime soon. You know, there are some things that we still need to generate PDFs for delivery. But as you've seen, using BIM 360 as a platform, it means that we're able to think about more intelligent workflows to get a model into a different space. Those other spaces, such as doing an estimation or a clash management task, or heading further downstream into the facilities management and so forth. What I haven't told you is that the document management part of BIM 360, if we were to upload a Revit file and based on some other Revit project settings, we can automatically extract out the drawings, completely bypassing the PDF process altogether. So in some cases, hopefully many cases, you can actually go direct from BIM to the next stage without having to go through traditional middle steps such as a PDF. And products like BIM 360 that are running on the cloud enable this process. BIM 360 works on Autodesk Forge, and Forge is an application programming interface layer that helps yourselves, maybe through custom program development, or third parties, such as those examples that I showed you in the card library, to connect to the information within your BIM 360 projects. It's because those projects are data rich, it means that we can actually access that data in other and hopefully more creative manners. And yeah, just to finish off here, this was just a simple example to show you that built into BIM 360 is a third-party app store connecting those third-party developers into your project data should you want to expand access to it into other people and other kinds of workflows that I've mentioned throughout the course of this session. So let's actually take a quick live demonstration of what this could look like. So here we can see we've got the document management space, and within my published documentation for architecture, I can see that I have a number of I'm going to call them documents. They're drawings, but BIM 360 refers to them as documents. These documents are drawings that have been derived directly from my Revit file, as you can see on the file name over towards the right side. Now, these documents, they've got a status telling me which documents have been formally approved or maybe rejected. I can see that they have a version. And when I open up the version history here, I can see version 3 in particular was previously approved. I can see 2 of them have been attached into what we call a set so that we can group documents together. And we can always download or make current those past versions. Looking a little bit further over to the right-hand side, we can see the sets that they're attached to, any markups and issues that may also be attached to those documents. So let's go ahead and have a look at what a document looks like. So this is just a floor plan drawing, just giving it a moment to load up here. All right, so now while that's still just going through the loading up process, I can start interacting with it, and eventually my markups and my issues will start appearing over the top of it until it's completely loaded. Now, down the bottom, I can open up a split view mode. This helps me to put other drawing and model information side by side with my main drawing on the left. So here we can see, and once again, just noting, we're working entirely within a web browser. We've got the drawing on the left, and we've got our BIM over on the right-hand side. This is contextual information. This means that when I select an object like a wall in the BIM, it will contextually show me where that is over on my drawing on the left-hand side. And this works the other direction as well. If I select maybe a wall that's on the inside of the building on the left, over on my BIM on the right-hand side, you can easily see where that is within the project. And it's not just the BIM, but we can also open up other drawings that may also be published within that same folder. Closing the split view mode, let's have a look at a document comparison. Looking at version 3 and version 4, let's overlay those two. And this is a real-time overlay process whereby it's grabbing both of those and it's now telling me what those differences are. Here we can see, let me zoom in a little bit for clarity, I can see any elements that have been added, you know, what they are, what their ID number is, so I can go and find them back inside my Revit project. I can see any elements that have been removed and maybe any elements that have been modified as well. And not just the elements that have been modified, but also the ability to see not only where they are now, but also where they previously were. Like so. Let's jump out of the comparison process and go back to the drawing. Now, over on the left-hand side, we've got our list of markups, and we can quite easily select these markups and actually just quickly traverse through them to see where they are on our drawing. But adding our own markup in is a pretty straightforward process. Let's say we've got a wall over here that might need to be removed. Using my markup tools over on the left-hand side, I'm going to use the freehand tool to begin with. I might just freehand in a little sort of circle around it. That circle there, I might change the color, might even change the thickness of the line work that's on it, like so. Maybe I want to put an arrow that points over towards it. You know, that arrow there is it's a little bit too big as well, so I might just reduce the size, and I might just change the color. And I might even put a text note over here as well. So let me just grab that text note. I might put in here the word remove. Okay, put that towards the end, and I can also, if need be, just minimize the size of the font on that, like so. Now this markup that I'm putting in is currently, and by default, going to be a private markup. That means when I save it back into the system, it means that this is a markup that only I can view. Not until such a time as I publish this will it become visible to other users. So when I publish it, it means now that other people can act and review this information. It tells those other people who put the markup on, when they did it, and a date if it was done on a different date to today, and also the version number that it's attached to. It means that as this document goes through future revisions, so therefore getting a version 5, 6, 7, and so forth, any unfinished markups will overlay onto those newer versions that are uploaded. And should that information have been addressed by the design team and therefore no longer relevant in this list, it means we can simply archive that information. That removes it from the list, but noting it's not deleted because we can always come back and turn on past archived markups. Now, having a look at issues, here is this door issue that we saw inside the PowerPoint presentation previously. I can see what type of issue it is, who it's assigned to, what the due date is, and so forth. It also shows me over on the drawing where this issue occurs. So therefore, somebody out on site using the mobile application has access to the same information. The activities list gives me a record of the steps that it's gone through. So Letitia has previously opened this. She must have assigned it to me, and I've gone through and provided a few responses. And we get that transparency into the activity so that everybody can remain on the same page rather than hiding behind emails saying that maybe something was done when maybe it hadn't, or maybe vice versa. And I, as the owner of this, have the ability to come back and then close it out. So making sure that this has been resolved and then closing the issue altogether. Let's jump over to the design collaboration module now. So looking at it from the perspective of a Revit design team, here we can see up towards the top, we've got our list of different teams. They could be different disciplines. They could be other different companies as well. But let's keep the workflow internal to your organization that might be a multidiscipline organization. Here I can see the architecture team has been generating some packages on the timeline. I can see when they were shared, or if they were shared. This is one that was created but was never shared in the past. And we can also see the same for other teams. If we zoom in and focus on the most recent packages for the architecture team, and then selecting the latest package, and in doing so, let me just minimize this top timeline up to give us a little bit more space underneath. I can see the contents of this package is that it includes a preliminary set of drawings, of which there's 8 of them, and 1 3D view. We can actually click through and start viewing the contents of this package. I can see the floor plan and the elevations and other information, as well as a project model, which is the BIM, that we can also view. And much like the design comparison process that I showed you with the 2D drawing, as part of the package sharing, reviewing, and consumption process, it means we can also access that same information before we decide whether we would like to consume this as maybe a file link into our own discipline's workflow. If we exit the changes, let me zoom out a little bit here. That'll do. Over on the left-hand side, I can also overlay other discipline information. So here I've got, just giving it a moment to load, I've got the services and also the structure information. If I toggle on just the architecture and services, it means that I can start maybe stripping away some of these elements, such as the roof and maybe the ceiling, so that I can inspect where those services are running through some of my architectural objects. Now, obviously, this is different to doing an actual coordination review through the coordination module, but this still, this still starts giving us more relevant information as part of the design process. Let me leave the architecture on and turn the services off. And if this was a large multi-level project, it also means that we can start slicing through the project vertically by way of the levels within that project. So we can go from the ground floor, maybe up to a high level, and in this case, up to the roof level, and then back to the main building again, like so. Now, when we do have a look at that coordination process, here is that results matrix that I was talking about previously. Here we can see the IFC model with some of these Revit files, and the same again across the top side. And then where they intersect, this is where we can access those clash results. Now, I've already got another tab open here just for a little bit of speed. So clicking in through that 42 result on the matrix brings us to this. Here we can see the overall number of coordination issues, which I can change how we view them. Maybe in this case here, I want to change over to the MEP model. And just like in the PowerPoint example, if I was to change over to a system name, we can then start identifying where individual systems are clashing with a group of structural items. And I can actually select them to more clearly identify them, and then ultimately raising an issue that I then assign to somebody. I actually need to put a pin in first, like so that I can assign it to somebody. That somebody receives an email to say that clashes have been assigned to them, and then therefore they've got a period of time, maybe by a due date, that those clashes should ideally be resolved. And lastly, our field management module. The ability to take a predefined list of templates. These are templates that you define for your purpose. From these templates, we create our checklist. Now, I've already got a number of checklists found over on the checklists tab. So I'm going to jump over. I'm going to select, in this case, the exhaust fan installation checklist. This is currently being undertaken in room 123, which happens to be the men's toilet. Okay, and we can see here the current state. Here is a question which has failed, and in this case, an issue has already been raised. That issue we can select so that we can contextually, with this checklist, see what this issue is referring to, and it contains much of the same issue details as what I showed you back inside the document management space. We go through, we close out the issue, and then ultimately we can go through and close out the checklist, which includes our required signature, typically done, once again, if we're on that mobile device. Now, I'm pretty much done, but what I'm going to do is, let me just come back to the PowerPoint for the moment and just pop this up here. In your chat window, I've already copied and pasted this web link here. This is just a little bit of a handout for you to take away. You can either take a copy of it from here or just head to the chat list inside the Zoom software that we're running for this presentation. Grab the web link, and this will take you to a PDF, an interactive PDF, which will give you basically a summary of the information that I've covered today, but in context with what is a typical BIM 360 workflow. You've got buttons down the left-hand side so that you can focus on, if you were to buy a docs license, what features do you get? Or maybe versus a build license. Or if you're instead wanting to know what the features are that are typically used by certain roles, they're also listed over here. So maybe an architect or an engineer, maybe a subcontractor, or maybe a retailer. And by way of this PDF, you'll be able to get just a summary as to which features are relevant to which license type and also which role. And not to mention, once you've identified certain features, you can actually click these features on this workflow, which will take you to a one-page summary of that particular feature. So have that as a takeaway, just a little bit of a summary of the features found across BIM 360 at the moment. And if you've got questions, or if you would like us to do a presentation to the rest of your office, design team, construction team, and so forth, there's also details within that PDF file. Now, I've only got a couple of minutes and can probably answer a handful of questions. So I'm just simply going to take the questions that are in the question list right now and no more. So let me just take a moment just to read through these. So there's a question here about what the recommended minimum internet speed is for an efficient speed of modeling and synchronization. The answer to that is that it has to be modest. Doesn't have to be the top of the line, but it certainly can't be the bottom. It also depends on the size of the projects that you're working on, and also the number of users. And we are talking specifically about design collaboration and Revit, because that's where the most data is transferred. For other regular users, those that are accessing the BIM 360 information through the web browser, then it's not as demanding on your internet connection. There's another question about the synchronization, about speeds as well. It's actually from the same person. Yes, it just comes down to the connection speed as to the performance of that. Somebody just making a note about some other tools and about capturing the data. Yeah, look, there's going to be some differences between this and other products. I guess it comes down to which one best suits what it is that you want to do. BIM 360 is still technically a fairly young product, and it is going to go through further development. There is a fairly long list of new features that will reach BIM 360 that Autodesk announced at Autodesk University last year. Can you print PDFs from the BIM 360 shared documents online portal? Yes, there is actually a print button so that you can print. How well that prints in terms of scaling is probably going to vary, because you are printing from a web page essentially, as opposed to some kind of desktop application, but there is a print button there. And somebody just saying, thank you for the presentation. All right, so what we might do, we'll close it up. Like I said, grab that PDF, have a browse through it. If you want to contact us about any more details, a presentation or implementation, by all means do so. The details are there. But let's close out the session, and thank you for your attendance.